The mall echoed with a child's desperate screams, raw, piercing cries that cut through the hum of shoppers and elevator music like a knife through silence. "Mommy! Mommy!" Two armed guards in sharp black suits gripped Linda by each arm, their fingers digging into her flesh as they dragged her forward. Her feet stumbled over the polished tile, her cleaning uniform still damp with mop water. Behind her, a little girl no older than 4 thrashed in the arms of another suited man, her small fists pounding against his chest, her face red and streaked with tears. "Mommy, don't leave me! Mommy!" People stopped. They stared. Some pulled out their phones, fingers hovering over screens, uncertain. Others whispered to each other, eyes wide with confusion. But most who recognized the cold precision of those black suits, the earpieces, the bulges beneath their jackets, looked away quickly and kept walking. These were not men you questioned. These were not men you challenged. "How dare you try to kidnap and manipulate the daughter of one of the most dangerous men in Korea?" One of the guards spat, his English broken but his tone crystal clear. Linda's heart hammered against her ribs. "Kidnap? I didn't try to kidnap anybody." Her voice cracked, desperation flooding every word. She twisted in their grip, trying to turn back to the crying child. "Please, you don't understand." "Somebody help me!" she screamed, her eyes searching the faces of strangers who refused to meet her gaze. But no one came, no one moved. The guards yanked her harder, pulling her toward the exit where tinted SUVs waited like black beasts in the parking lot. Behind her, the little girl's cries grew more frantic, more broken. "Mommy! Mama! Don't go!" 2 days ago, Linda had stood in the mall manager's cramped office, her hands folded politely in her lap as he explained her duties. Mop the floors, clean the restrooms, empty the trash bins. 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. The pay was barely enough to cover rent and rice, but she had smiled and thanked him anyway. What choice did she have? This was not the life she had imagined when she boarded that plane from Accra 18 months ago. Back then, her suitcase had been filled with pressed blouses and professional skirts, her head filled with dreams of glass office buildings and spreadsheets, of climbing the ladder in accounting like she'd trained for. 5 years of university, 5 years of late nights and early mornings, sacrificing everything to earn that degree. Also, she could build something better, something more. But dreams, Linda had learned, were expensive, and sometimes they were sold by liars. Quadwo, even thinking his name made her stomach turn. He had appeared at a career fair in Accra, all smooth smiles and crisp business cards. He called himself a relocation specialist, and his pitch was perfect. He knew people, he said. He had connections in South Korea, big companies looking for qualified accountants, especially international candidates. The salary he quoted made her breath catch. He showed her photos of other Ghanaians he'd helped, all of them supposedly thriving in Seoul and Busan. Success stories, proof. All he needed was $4,000, visa fees, flight tickets, administrative costs, and most importantly, setting up her local bank account so her salary could be deposited the moment she arrived. He even offered to convert her money into won and deposit it for her, so she wouldn't have to worry about exchange rates or getting scammed. He made it sound so easy, so safe. Linda had saved for 2 years to scrape together that money. Every cedi counted, every sacrifice made. She handed it all to Quadwo with trembling hands and a heart full of hope. The flight to Busan had been the longest 13 hours of her life. She had stared out the window as the plane descended, watching the sprawling city lights below, imagining her new office, her new colleagues, her new beginning. When she landed, she walked through the airport in a daze, following signs she couldn't read, her suitcase rolling behind her. The first red flag came at the ATM. She inserted the card Quadwo had mailed her, the one supposedly linked to her new account with her converted funds. The screen blinked. Then it displayed a message in Korean and English, "Insufficient funds." She tried again, same message. Her hands started shaking. She called Quadwo. The line rang once, then cut to a robotic voice. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. She called again and again and again, each time that same cold, mechanical voice. It hit her all at once, standing alone in that airport terminal, surrounded by travelers rushing past her, speaking a language she didn't understand. The job didn't exist. The bank account was empty, or never existed at all. Quadwo had taken everything and disappeared like smoke. Linda had sunk onto a bench, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Not here, not in front of all these people. She had a visa, at least that was real. She had a plane ticket back to Ghana in 3 months, but no money to change it and no home to return to even if she could. Pride was a heavy thing. How could she go back and tell everyone she'd been scammed, that she'd been a fool? So she stayed, and she survived. Barely. She took a job washing dishes at a restaurant where the owner paid her under the table, then cleaning hotel rooms where the supervisor yelled at her in Korean she couldn't understand, but whose meaning was clear enough in his tone. She slept in a tiny room she shared with 2 other migrant workers, the rent eating up most of what she earned. She learned to stretch a bag of rice for a week. She learned which convenience stores threw out food at closing time. And 2 days ago, she had taken this job at the mall. It wasn't dignified. It wasn't what her degree was for, but it was work, and work meant survival. That morning, Linda had been mopping the 3rd-floor hallway near the children's play area and the luxury boutiques that sold handbags worth more than she'd earn in a year. Her mind wandered, as it always did during these long shifts, back to Ghana, to her mother's face when she'd said goodbye at the airport, to the version of herself who had believed Quadwo's promises. She hummed softly an old church hymn her grandmother used to sing. The melody kept her company in the loneliness. Then she heard it. Soft footsteps, small ones. Linda looked up from her mop and saw a little girl standing a few feet away. She couldn't have been more than 4 years old, wearing an expensive white dress with delicate lace trim and tiny patent leather shoes that gleamed under the mall lights. Her hair was pulled into 2 neat pigtails tied with silk ribbons. But her face was crumpled with confusion and sadness, her lower lip trembling. The child was clearly lost. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then the little girl's face transformed. Her eyes went wide, bright with sudden recognition and joy. She squealed, a sound of pure relief and happiness, and ran forward with her arms outstretched. "Mama! Mama!" Before Linda could react, the child crashed into her legs, wrapping her small arms around her knees and burying her face in the fabric of her uniform. Linda dropped her mop, the handle clattering against the floor. Oh no, sweetie, I think you've made a mistake." Linda's heart raced. She looked around frantically for the child's parents, for anyone who might claim her. The hallway was nearly empty. A few shoppers passed by, glancing over with mild curiosity before continuing on. Linda crouched down carefully, trying to gently pry the little girl's arms away. "Hey, baby," she said softly, forcing her voice to stay calm and warm despite the panic rising in her chest. "What's your name?" The little girl pulled back just enough to look at her, and Linda's breath caught. The child's eyes were puffy and red. She'd been crying for a while. Her cheeks were tear-stained, but now she was smiling through it all, smiling at Linda like she was the answer to every prayer. "Rena," the little girl announced, her voice high and sweet. "Rena," Linda repeated gently. "That's a beautiful name. But sweetie, I'm not your mommy. I think you're confused." "Mama," Rena insisted, reaching up to touch Linda's face with her small, soft hand. Linda's chest tightened. She took Rena's hand carefully in her own. "No, baby, I'm not your mama, but let's go find her together, okay? I bet she's looking for you right now. She must be so worried." Rena's smile faltered. Her lip began trembling again. "Come on," Linda said, standing and keeping hold of Rena's small hand. "Let's walk around and find your mommy. She's probably just—" "Mommy!" Rena's voice broke into a wail.
"Mommy, don't leave me again!" The child pulled back, trying to tug Linda in the opposite direction, tears streaming down her face once more. Linda's heart broke at the sound. This little girl wasn't just lost, she was terrified, abandoned maybe, or at least that's what she felt. "Shh, it's okay, Linda tried to soothe her, but Rena was crying too hard to hear.
That's when Linda heard them. Fast, heavy footsteps, multiple sets. She looked up and her blood went cold. 4 men in black suits were striding toward her with purpose and fury. They moved like a unit, their faces hard and expressionless except for the anger burning in their eyes. They had earpieces. One of them was speaking rapidly into his wrist. They looked like Secret Service, like military, like people who didn't ask questions before they acted. One of them reached Linda and Rena first. He grabbed Rena, yanking the child away from Linda's grasp. Rena screamed. "Wait," Linda started, but before she could finish, 2 other men seized her by the arms, their grips like iron. "Do you know the child of whom you were messing with?" one of them growled, his accent thick, but his threat unmistakable. "I wasn't messing with anyone," Linda gasped, trying to pull free. Pain shot through her shoulders as they twisted her arms. "She ran up to me. She was lost. I was just trying to help." "You would regret your existence," another guard snarled. They started dragging her. Linda's feet slid uselessly against the smooth floor as she tried to find purchase, tried to resist. "Please, listen to me. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just a cleaner here. I was just—" But they weren't listening. They never intended to listen. Behind her, Rena sobbed in the arms of the 4th guard, reaching out toward Linda with both hands, her small face destroyed by anguish. "Mommy, don't leave me again, Mommy!" "I'm not." Linda tried to turn, tried to explain to the child, to anyone, but the guards yanked her forward harder. The guard holding Rena spoke to her in rapid Korean, his tone firm but not unkind. Linda couldn't understand the words, but she could hear him trying to reason with the child, trying to tell her that Linda wasn't her mother. But Rena didn't stop. She didn't believe him. She kept crying, kept calling out, kept reaching. "Mommy, Mama, please!" People were staring now. Phones were definitely out. Linda's vision blurred with tears of frustration and fear. "Somebody help me!" she screamed one more time, her voice breaking. "Please, I didn't do anything wrong!" But the crowd parted like water around them, nobody daring to step forward, nobody willing to stand between those men and their target. As they dragged her toward the exit, toward whatever fate awaited her in those black SUVs, Linda's mind raced with a single terrible thought. She had survived Quadja's betrayal. She had survived being abandoned in a foreign country with nothing. She had survived 18 months of humiliation and hardship. But she didn't know if she would survive this. They shoved Linda into the back of a black Mercedes, 1 guard on either side of her, their bodies pressed against her like walls of stone. The door slammed shut with a heavy, final sound. Through the tinted windows, she could barely see the mall entrance growing smaller behind them. Ahead, 3 more identical Mercedes moved in formation, a convoy cutting through traffic like sharks through water. Linda's hands trembled in her lap. Her cleaning uniform was still damp with sweat and mop water. She could smell the industrial cleaner on her skin, a sharp chemical scent that now felt like evidence of how ordinary her life had been just 30 minutes ago. Just 30 minutes ago, she'd been nobody, invisible, a foreign cleaner that people looked through, not at. Now, she was a suspect, a kidnapper, a threat to someone powerful enough to command armed men in suits. The guard to her left spoke into his earpiece in rapid Korean. The one to her right stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, his hand resting near the bulge beneath his jacket. She dared not move. She barely dared to breathe. The convoy drove for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. They left the crowded streets of central Busan behind, climbing into the hills where the houses grew larger and farther apart, hidden behind walls and trees. Old money, new money, dangerous money. When they finally stopped, Linda looked up and her stomach dropped. The mansion loomed before her like something from a movie.
Not the kind of movie with happy endings, the kind with interrogations and bodies that disappeared. The outer wall stretched at least 12 feet high, topped with cameras that tracked their arrival. The gate was solid steel, intricate and impenetrable, sliding open with a mechanical hum that sounded almost like a growl. Beyond it, the ground spread out in manicured perfection. Stone pathways, sculptured hedges, fountains that probably cost more than Linda would earn in 10 lifetimes. The mansion itself was massive, all clean lines and dark glass, modern architecture that somehow felt cold despite its beauty. More cameras, more guards stationed at the entrance, security systems blinking red from every corner. Linda's throat grew dry. Heat crept up her neck, her skin prickling with a fear so intense that it made her lightheaded. Just this morning, she'd woken up in her tiny shared room, heated leftover rice for breakfast, and walked to work through streets where nobody knew her name. Now she was here, and she understood with terrible clarity that people could disappear in a place like this, and no one would ever find them. The guards pulled her from the car with the same brutality they'd used in the mall. One of them gripped her arm hard enough to bruise, dragging her up the marble steps and through the front entrance. She stumbled, her worn sneakers squeaking against floors so polished she could see her reflection in them. The interior was overwhelming. Vaulted ceilings, chandeliers dripping with crystal, art on the walls that looked ancient and priceless. Everything was white and black and gold, sterile in its perfection. The kind of wealth that didn't just buy comfort, but power, control, fear. They didn't give her time to take it in. The guard yanked her down a hallway, then another, descending a staircase that led away from the luxury above. With each step down, the temperature dropped. The marble gave way to concrete. The lights grew dimmer. At the bottom, he shoved her through a heavy door into a room that made her knees nearly buckle. It was small, windowless. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows across gray walls. There was a metal table in the center, 2 chairs on either side, and on the floor, Linda's eyes fixed on them, and her breath caught. Dark stains. Old ones. Rust-colored. And permanent. Blood. The guard forced her into one of the chairs. The metal was cold through her thin uniform. He didn't cuff her, didn't need to. The message was clear. There was nowhere to run. 2 of them stood over her, their faces impassive. The questions came fast, sharp, each one an accusation. What were you doing with the girl? I was cleaning. She ran to me. I didn't... What did you do to her? What did you give her? Nothing. I didn't give her anything. Why is she calling you mother? What kind of sick game are you playing? She made a mistake. She's confused. I don't know why. Are you part of a trafficking ring? Who sent you? Linda's voice cracked, tears streaming down her face now. No, please. I'm just a cleaner at the mall. Check the cameras. Check the CCTV. You'll see I'm telling the truth. You expect us to believe a stranger walks up to the daughter of Suwon and she just happens to call you mother? That name, Suwon. The way they said it carried weight, carried warning. I don't know, Linda sobbed, her whole body shaking. I don't know why she called me that. Please, just check the cameras. You'll see. I didn't do anything wrong. One of the guards leaned in close, his breath hot against her face. You better hope you're telling the truth, because when our boss gets here, if you've touched one hair on that child's head, you won't live to regret it. Linda buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving. Everything had spiraled so far, so fast. This morning, she'd been worried about making rent. Now, she was worried about making it out alive. They left her alone after that, the door slamming shut behind them. The sound echoed in the small room, followed by the click of a lock. Linda sat in the silence, staring at the bloodstains on the floor, wondering whose they were, wondering if hers would join them. Hours passed, or maybe just 1 hour. Time felt strange in that room, elastic and cruel. No one came. No one brought water. She was too terrified to even feel hungry, though she hadn't eaten since her shift started at 6 that morning. Eventually, exhaustion won over fear. Linda folded her arms on the cold metal table and rested her head on them. Her eyes burned, her body ached, and despite everything, despite the terror and the blood and the locked door, she slipped into a thin, restless sleep. Somewhere above her, in the mansion's main wing, Suan returned home. He walked through his front door with the same controlled calm he always carried, his expression unreadable. He wore a black suit, perfectly tailored, his dark hair swept back. At 36, he was young to have built the empire he controlled, but he'd earned every piece of it through intelligence, ruthlessness, and an ability to see 3 moves ahead of everyone else. 2 of his senior men met him immediately in the foyer, their faces tight with anxiety. "Sir, there was an incident." Suan's eyes went cold. What kind of incident? They explained quickly, stumbling over their words. The mall, Rena, the woman, how she'd been caught trying to take Rena, how Rena had been calling her mother, how they had brought both back here for questioning. With each word, Suan's jaw tightened. By the time they finished, his anger was palpable, radiating off him like heat. "You let my daughter out of your sight?" His voice was low, controlled, but it carried the kind of danger that made grown men flinch. "You let a stranger get close enough to touch her?" "Sir, we only turned away for a moment. She wandered." "I don't want excuses." Suan's eyes burned into them. "I trusted you with the only thing in this world that matters to me, and you almost lost her." The men went pale. Everyone who worked for Suan knew his reputation, knew what he was capable of, but they also knew that his daughter, his Rena, was the single line no one dared to cross. "Where is she now?" "In her room, sir, with her nanny. But she won't stop crying. She won't eat, won't sleep." Suan was already moving, taking the stairs 2 at a time. He reached Rena's room and pushed open the door. The nanny stood near the window, wringing her hands, her face etched with worry, and there on the bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and silk pillows, was his daughter. Rena sat hunched over, her small body shaking with sobs. Her face was red and swollen, her eyes puffy from crying. She'd been crying for hours. Her beautiful dress was wrinkled, her hair coming loose from its ribbons. Suan's heart cracked at the sight. "Rena," he said softly, moving to her side and kneeling down. "Baby, I'm here now. It's okay. Daddy's here." He reached out to lift her into his arms, to hold her the way he should have been holding her all along, but when his hands touched her shoulders, Rena pulled away, twisting out of his grasp. "No!" she cried, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I want Mommy! I want my Mommy!" The words hit him like a physical blow. "Rena, listen to me." He tried again, his voice gentle but firm. "That woman isn't your mother. She's not your mommy, baby. You made a mistake." "Mommy!" Rena sobbed, inconsolable. "Where's Mommy? I want Mommy!" Suan sat back on his heels, stunned. He had seen his daughter sad before, withdrawn, quiet, but never like this. Never this desperate, this broken, this insistent. And she was choosing a stranger over him. The realization cut deeper than any knife. He stood slowly, his mind racing. The 2 guards were waiting in the hallway, practically vibrating with nervous energy. "Sir, we reviewed the CCTV footage from the mall. The woman, she was telling the truth. Rena ran to her. The woman tried to take her hand to find help. She didn't grab her. She didn't lure her. Rena went to her." Suan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Run a full background check on her. I want to know everything. Who she is, where she came from, why my daughter is calling her mother." "Yes, sir, right away." But Suan was already moving again, this time toward the basement, toward the interrogation room. He needed to see this woman for himself, needed to understand what kind of person could capture his daughter's heart so completely in a single moment. The door to the room was locked. He nodded to the guard, who opened it immediately. Inside, slumped over the table with her head resting on her folded arms, was Linda. She was asleep. Suan paused in the doorway, studying her. She looked ordinary, exhausted. Her cleaning uniform was wrinkled and stained. Her hair had come loose from a tie. She had dark circles under her eyes. There was nothing threatening about her, nothing dangerous. In fact, if he was being honest, she looked beautiful in a quiet, unassuming way. The kind of beauty that didn't demand attention, but earned it anyway. He stepped closer, his footsteps echoing softly on the concrete floor. Linda stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then widening as she saw him standing there. She jerked upright, her chair scraping against the floor, her whole body going rigid with fear. "Please," she started, her voice hoarse. Suwon held up a hand, cutting her off. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down slowly, deliberately, his movements calm and controlled. "What did you do to my daughter?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost conversational. Linda's hands trembled. I didn't do anything. I don't understand what's happening." "She won't eat. She won't sleep. She won't stop crying." His eyes locked on hers, searching. "So I'll ask you again. What did you do to her?" "Nothing," Linda's voice broke. "I was cleaning. She came to me. She called me Mommy, and I tried to tell her I wasn't. I tried to find her parents, and then your men." Her breath hitched. "Please, I'm telling the truth. I don't know why she called me that. I've never seen her before today." They sat in silence for a long moment. Suwon watched her, carefully, reading every micro-expression, every nervous gesture. This woman wasn't lying.
There was something about her, a sincerity in her exhaustion, a genuine confusion in her fear that made him want to believe her immediately. Maybe that was the same thing that had drawn Rina to her, some quality that couldn't be faked. But it still nagged at him. His daughter had chosen her, had called her mother, had cried for her instead of for him. In that moment, sitting across from this trembling stranger, Suwon forced himself to face a truth he'd been avoiding for a year. This was his fault. He'd failed Rina. He'd buried himself in work, in gang wars, in building his empire higher and wider, all to avoid the gaping wound of his wife's death. And in doing so, he'd abandoned his daughter when she needed him most. Rina was crying for this woman because she'd learned that her father wouldn't be there, that strangers were safer than him. "Come with me," Suwon said suddenly, standing. Linda's eyes went wide. "What? Where?" "My daughter needs to see you." "But I don't understand." "Neither do I," Suwon said, his voice hard but not unkind. "But if seeing you will make her stop crying, if it will make her eat something, sleep, then I need you to come with me. Now." He gestured to the guard at the door. "Let her out. Take her upstairs." Linda stood on shaky legs, still not understanding, still terrified, but having no choice but to follow. They led her back up through the mansion, through the luxury that felt like a fever dream after the concrete room. Linda's mind raced. What was happening? Why were they taking her to the child? Was this a trick? Another test? They stopped outside a door painted soft pink, with a brass nameplate that read Rina in both Korean and English. Suwon pushed it open. Inside, Rina still sat on her bed, hiccuping with sobs, her face buried in her hands. The nanny looked up hopefully when Suwon entered, but her expression turned confused when she saw Linda behind him. Then Rina looked up. Her red, swollen eyes went wide. For a heartbeat, the room was completely silent. Then Rina's face transformed. Like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, joy spread across her features. She scrambled off the bed with a squeal, her little legs carrying her across the room faster than should have been possible. "Mama!" she cried, her voice bright and clear and filled with relief. "Mama, you came back!" She crashed into Linda's legs with the full force of her small body, wrapping her arms tight, her face pressed against Linda's uniform.
Why did you leave me again? Rena asked, pulling back just enough to look up at Linda with those heartbreaking eyes. I missed you. I missed you so much. Linda stood frozen. Every instinct screamed at her to step back, to explain to everyone watching that this was a mistake, that she wasn't this child's mother, that they needed to let her go home. This wasn't her problem. She'd had enough trouble for one lifetime. But then she looked down at Rena's face. Really looked. The child was exhausted. Her eyes were nearly swollen shut from crying. Her cheeks were blotchy and tear-stained. Her little body trembled with the aftermath of hours of sobbing. She looked fragile, broken, like she'd been screaming into a void and no one had answered. Linda knew that feeling. She'd lived it. Instead of pulling away, Linda knelt down. Slowly, carefully, she wrapped her arms around Rena and pulled her close, holding her gently against her chest. "It's okay," Linda whispered, her voice thick with emotion she didn't understand. "I'm here now. It's okay." Rena melted into her embrace, her sobs finally quieting into soft whimpers. She clutched at Linda's uniform like it was a lifeline. And then, incredibly, she started to giggle. A small sound at first, then growing. Her exhaustion giving way to a relief so profound it bubbled out of her as laughter. "Mama's here," Rena murmured, her voice drowsy now, peaceful. "Mama came back." Across the room, Soo-won stood completely still, watching. His daughter who hadn't smiled in over a year, who had become a ghost of herself, who he'd failed in every way that mattered, was laughing. In a stranger's arms, she was laughing. Jealousy burned hot up his neck, tightening his chest. That should be him. Rena should be in his arms. He was her father. He was the one who'd kept her safe, who'd built this empire to give her everything.
But even as the jealousy flared, he couldn't look away from the scene before him, couldn't deny what he was seeing. His daughter was happy. For the first time in so long, she was genuinely, truly happy. One of his men appeared at the door, moving quietly to Soo-won's side. He leaned in close and whispered, handing him a photograph. Soo-won took it, his eyes still on Linda and Rena. Then he looked down. The photograph showed a younger woman, still clearly Linda, but brighter somehow, less worn down, sitting cross-legged on a colorful playmat. On her lap was a tiny girl, maybe 2 years old, with pigtails and a pink dress. "Rena." "Sir," the man whispered, "we found the connection. She worked at Sunlight Daycare. She was Rena's caregiver. About a year ago, for approximately 3 months before the facility closed." Everything clicked into place. Soo-won's breath caught. A year ago, the worst period of his life, when his wife had been dying and he'd been drowning in grief and guilt, when he'd sent Rena away because he didn't know what else to do with her. He'd forgotten. He'd been so lost in his own pain that he'd forgotten where he'd sent his daughter, who had cared for her, everything beyond the fact that she was somewhere safe while he fell apart. Soo-won moved across the room slowly, holding the photograph. Linda was still kneeling, still holding Rena, who had finally fallen asleep in her arms, her small body going limp with exhaustion, her face peaceful at last. "Linda?" Soo-won said softly. She looked up at him, her eyes questioning, still afraid. He showed her the photograph. Linda's eyes widened, her breath caught. She looked down at the sleeping child in her arms, then back at the photo, then up at Soo-won. "Oh my God," she whispered, tears suddenly spilling down her cheeks. "Oh my God, this is Rena! This is..." Her mind reeled backward through time. Soo-won stood there, the photograph still in his hand, watching this woman cradle his daughter with a tenderness that made his chest ache. He felt something crack open inside him, something that had been locked tight for a year.
"I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion he rarely showed anyone. Linda looked up at him, waiting. Suwon sat down on the edge of Rena's bed, suddenly feeling the weight of everything he'd been carrying alone. "A year ago," you began, each word heavy. "My wife died. Rena's mother. She'd been sick for months. Cancer. And I wasn't there." I covered my face with my hands for a moment, the gesture making him look suddenly vulnerable, suddenly human. "I was always working, always gone, building my territory, making deals, fighting wars. I told myself I was doing it for them, for my family, to give them everything. But the truth is, I was running. I couldn't face watching her die. I couldn't face my own helplessness." His voice cracked. "She died when I was 300 miles away closing a deal. I got the call and I came home to an empty house. Rena was at daycare. My wife was gone, and I fell apart." Linda listened in silence, her hand gently stroking Rena's hair. Suwon continued, "I didn't know what to do with Rena. She was so small. I didn't know how to tell her that her mother was never coming back. I didn't know how to help her when I couldn't even help myself. So I did the worst thing I could have done." He looked directly at Linda now, shame evident in his eyes. "I sent her away every day, dropped her off at that daycare, and buried myself in work again. I told myself she was better off around other children, around professionals who knew how to care for kids. But really, I was just avoiding her, avoiding the grief we should have been sharing." He gestured at the photograph in Linda's hands. "You were there for her when I wasn't. You gave her what I was too broken to give, and when the daycare closed..." He let out a shaky breath. "I should have noticed, should have made sure she was okay with the transition. But I didn't. I just found another place to send her, then another nanny, and I kept working, kept building, kept running." Suwon's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Rena stopped talking, stopped playing. She became a ghost in her own home. And I didn't know how to reach her. I didn't know how to be what she needed." He looked at his daughter, asleep in Linda's arms, her face more peaceful than he'd seen it in months. "You were the last person who made her happy, the last person who made her feel safe, and I wasn't even there enough to remember you, to thank you, to make sure you could stay in her life when she clearly needed you." Linda's throat was tight. She looked down at Rena, this tiny girl who'd lost her mother, who'd been sent away by a grieving father, who'd found comfort in a stranger from Ghana, who'd been as lost and alone as she was. "I'm so sorry," Suwon said, and this time he was looking directly at Linda. "I'm sorry for what my men did to you today. I'm sorry for terrifying you. Rena means everything to me. She's all I have left. And when they told me someone had tried to take her..." He shook his head. "I would have torn this city apart to keep her safe, but they were wrong. You weren't trying to hurt her. You were just trying to help, the way you helped her a year ago when I couldn't." The silence in Rena's room felt heavy after Suwon's confession. Linda sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the sleeping child, feeling the weight of everything this man had just shared. His pain hung in the air like smoke, thick, suffocating, unresolved. She looked at him, standing there, this powerful man who commanded fear and respect from everyone around him, and all she saw was a father, drowning in guilt he didn't know how to release. Linda looked up at him. Grief is a strange thing. It doesn't follow rules. It doesn't care about what we think we should do or how we think we should feel.
Suwon looked at her, surprised she was still speaking. "When my father died," Linda continued, her voice quiet but steady. "I was angry at him for months. Angry that he left. Angry that he'd been sick and didn't tell us until it was too late. Angry that I couldn't fix it. It sounds foolish now, being angry at someone for dying, but grief makes us foolish sometimes." She looked down at Rena's peaceful face. "My mother told me something then that I didn't understand until much later. She said, 'You can't change yesterday, but yesterday also can't change what you do tomorrow.'" Linda lifted her eyes to meet Suwon's. "You weren't there then. That's true. You made mistakes. That's also true. But you're here now. And that's what Rena will remember when she grows up. Not the days you weren't there, but the days you chose to be." Her words were simple, delivered without judgment, without the harsh edge of criticism, just truth, spoken gently, like a hand extended to pull someone from deep water. "You did the best you could with the pain you had," Linda said. "That doesn't mean it was perfect, but it means it was human. And Rena doesn't need a perfect father. She just needs you. The real you. Present. Here." Something shifted in Suwon's expression. His jaw unclenched slightly. His shoulders, which had been rigid with defensive tension, dropped just a fraction. No one had spoken to him like this in years, maybe ever. Everyone in his world either feared him or wanted something from him. Even the few people he trusted kept a careful distance, never daring to challenge him, never offering anything beyond agreement or obedience. But this woman, this stranger who'd stumbled into his life by accident, was offering him something he didn't know he'd been desperate for. Forgiveness. Not from her, but permission to forgive himself. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough, for saying that." Linda smiled softly. "Rena is lucky to have you. She just needs you to believe that too." She looked down at the sleeping child in her arms, so peaceful now, her tiny chest rising and falling with deep, restful breaths. Carefully, gently, Linda stood and carried Rena to her bed. She laid her down among the silk pillows and pulled a soft blanket over her small body, tucking it around her shoulders. Rena stirred slightly, murmuring something in her sleep, then settled deeper into comfort. Linda stepped back, watching her for a moment longer, then turned to Suwon. "She'll be okay," Linda said quietly. "You both will." Suwon nodded, not trusting his voice to stay steady if he spoke. He walked Linda to the door, then gestured to one of his men waiting in the hallway. "Drive her home. Make sure she gets there safely." The guard nodded immediately. "Yes, sir." Linda started to follow the guard, but then Suwon's voice stopped her. "Linda." She turned back. "Thank you," he said again, and this time there was something different in his tone, something genuine and unguarded. "Truly, thank you." His men, standing at attention nearby, exchanged subtle glances. They had worked for Suwon for years, and they could count on one hand the number of times they'd heard him express gratitude like that, to anyone. Linda smiled. Then she was gone, led away through the mansion's gleaming hallways and out into the night. Suwon stood in the doorway of his daughter's room for a long time, watching her sleep. The photograph from the daycare was still in his hand. He looked at it again, at the woman who'd just left, younger and less worn down, holding his daughter with such natural tenderness. Then he looked at Rena, peaceful in her bed, her face relaxed in a way he hadn't seen in months. Something had changed tonight. He wasn't sure what, exactly, but he knew that Linda's presence had cracked something open that he'd kept sealed shut for too long. That evening, after his usual routine of business calls and reviewing reports, Suwon did something he rarely did anymore. He went to Rena's room for dinner. The staff had set up a small table near her window, with food arranged carefully on delicate plates. Rena sat in her chair,
her legs swinging above the floor, pushing rice around with her fork but not really eating. Suwon sat across from her, watching. She was quieter than she'd been with Linda. The brightness that had flooded her face earlier was dimmed now, replaced by something subdued. She took a small bite of chicken, chewed mechanically, then set her fork down. "Are you not hungry?" Suwon asked gently. Rena shook her head. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Rena looked up at him with those big, solemn eyes. "When is Mama coming back?" The words hit him like a punch to the chest. She meant Linda. She was asking about Linda. She went home, Rena. She has to sleep at her own house. But she said she wouldn't leave again. Rena's voice was so small, so fragile. She promised. She didn't promise, baby. She just... When is she coming back? Rena asked again, more insistent now. I don't know. Maybe soon. Rena's eyes filled with tears, and she looked down at her plate, her small shoulders trembling. Suwon wanted to reach across the table, to hold her, to promise her that Linda would come back, but he didn't know if that was true. He didn't know if Linda would want to come back to this complicated, dangerous world.
That brings us to the end of part 1 of the story. I truly hope you enjoyed it. I know you're eager for more. The second part will be out very soon. In the meantime, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about the storyline, the characters, or maybe your favorite scene so far? Drop your comments below. I always look forward to reading them. And if you'd like to support the channel, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really means a lot. See you in part 2.